Hi everyone, today I'm going to be doing the Midyear Book Freakout Tag, so I guess I'll be answering some questions about books that I read so far this year and looking ahead to the second half of the year. I don't know how much freaking out will be going on today, so I'm not entirely sure about the title, but it seems like that's what it's called, so that's what we're calling it. Alright, so the first question is the best book you've read so far in 2020. I think for me, that probably has to be The Goblin Emperor by Katherine Addison. I did a review of it right when I started my channel. I've read some other books this year that I really loved or that were really fun, but I think both in terms of how much I enjoyed it and how much it meant to me, and also how good I think it is, The Goblin Emperor probably takes the cake. The Goblin Emperor is a standalone fantasy, and it really is one of the best standalone fantasies I've ever read, and maybe one of the best books I've ever read. It's really deep and a little bit slow moving, but just in terms of how I related to Maya, the main character, and just everything about it, it was a really profound experience for me. And it was the first book in a while that as soon as I finished it, I read it for a second time. I do that sometimes, but only when I've really, really loved something to the point where I'm not able to put it down. Second question, best sequel you've read so far in 2020? I know I usually read a lot of series, but I feel like I actually haven't read that many sequels this year, and out of the ones that I did read, I'm not sure how many I liked. The things that come to mind would be Starsight by Sanderson. I enjoyed it a lot. It's not my favorite series by him, but he did do some really unexpected things in it. Starsight was really different than I expected based on Skyward. I think that's something maybe from Sanderson I should have learned to expect the unexpected in his sequels. But unlike there are some authors who they do the unexpected in their sequels, but it feels like they're just destroying everything in the first book by doing that, he's really good at building on to what was in the first book while delivering something you didn't expect. So I really loved a lot of the alien cultures in Starsight. He really broadened up the world and introduced some different ideas, and I feel like it really was a way for him to play with different ideas about culture and how the aliens viewed themselves, compared to some things he's done before. And it was a pretty cute book as well. There were a lot of entertaining character moments and characters that are just kind of memorable, even if they might not be the most deep. Honorable mention in terms of sequels for me goes to Ancillary Sword by Anne Leckie. It's the sequel to Ancillary Justice, and I read both of those books for the first time this year, but I guess technically that is a sequel because I read the first one and then I read the sequel. So I actually really enjoyed the second book in the series, Ancillary Sword, even more than the first one. I think I talked about this in a wrap-up before, but the reason I liked it better was just because it was a little more tightly focused, and even though I enjoyed some of the world building and the ideas that went into the first book, I felt like for me it really paid off in the second book, where I didn't have to work quite so hard to keep up with what was going on, and I could just enjoy the world and the things that I had already learned and sort of internalized about how things worked, and just be a little more focused on the story. Question number 3. A new release you haven't read yet but want to. Pretty much everything I'm looking forward to this year is coming out at the end of June or later, but I did notice recently that there's a new N.K. Jemisin book that's a contemporary fantasy, and I will admit I skipped over this one so far because for some reason I thought it was a short story collection. I think maybe she did a short story collection recently, or maybe I'm just totally confused. But anyway, for some reason I didn't realize that this was actually a novel, and it's a contemporary fantasy, which she hasn't done yet, and she is just a very interesting writer, so I definitely would like to check that out. Another book that just released that I haven't read yet but I'm interested in is called A Song of Wraiths and Ruin by Roseanne A. Brown. It's, I think, a YA fantasy that is based on West African folklore. I don't know really anything about this author or too much about the book, but it seemed like an interesting premise, and so when I read about it, I ended up putting it on my wish list at the library. Question number 4. Most anticipated release for the second half of the year. I actually just did a whole video about this. It was supposed to be my most anticipated releases in 2020, but apparently all of my most anticipated releases haven't come out yet. Obviously, Rhythm of War by Sanderson is the book that I am looking forward to more than anything else this year. I'm very excited for that. I really hope that they reveal the cover soon because I want to know. But I guess honorable mention in this category would go to Empire of Gold by S.A. Chakraborty, which is finishing the Devabad trilogy. That's coming out in just a couple of weeks. I'll give another honorable mention to Harrow the Ninth, which is coming out in August. Gideon the Ninth was one of my favorite books that I've read this year. I am assuming I'll find a way to mention this later on in this tag based on the questions, but if I don't get a chance to do that, then I'm mentioning it right now. Go read Gideon the Ninth. Question 5. Biggest disappointment? Okay, I think for me that would be Shorefall. It was the sequel to Foundryside. I didn't love Foundryside, but I did really like it. I thought he had a really good magic system going. I liked the characters, and Shorefall for me was a pretty disappointing follow-up. I hope that whatever the next book in the series is will kind of redeem it, but that's too bad. I was hoping that I would like Shorefall more than Foundryside and that it would kind of take my feelings about this series to the next level, and instead it just was kind of meh. The other disappointment for me was probably Rage of Dragons by Evan Winter, because this is a book that I just saw so much hype for, and I thought it was fine. I mean, it was a good book. I appreciate what he's doing, but I just wasn't a huge fan of it, and everyone was so excited about it that I really wanted to like it, and I will keep reading the series, but I was a little disappointed that it wasn't something that I got to be super excited about. Question 6 is biggest surprise. I think this is a good time to mention Gideon the Ninth. I already gave it a shout out. This is a book that I was so sure that I wasn't going to like because it seemed like it was a lot of things that I wasn't going to like. I don't really like horror. I think I've mentioned that the cover really freaked me out when I first saw it. It's about necromancy, and I was only reading this book because it was on the Hugo's list, and then it was the first book on that list that I got out of the library, and I was just trying to get it over with, and instead I totally loved it and became kind of obsessed with it. So that was a really good kind of surprise. I guess I could probably think of something that was a bad kind of surprise, but we'll just skip over that. Question 7 is favorite new author, debut or new to you? This is kind of hard to say. I don't know if I really have any favorite new authors, because I feel like to have a favorite author, you probably need to read more than one of their books and really love it. And I think a lot of the new stuff that I've liked, the author only has a single book out. But I'll just mention, out of the books that I read that are debuts, Gideon the Ninth, so the author of that is Tamsin Muir, and I really like her writing, so hopefully she'll become a favorite author. I'll also give a shout out to another book that is a finalist for the Hugo Award for Best Novel, A Memory Called Empire by Arkady Martine. That is also her first novel, so I will mention both Tamsin Muir and Arkady Martine, and hopefully I will continue really liking their books and I'll be able to call them favorite authors at some point. Question 8. Newest fictional crush. I honestly can't remember the last time I had a fictional crush. Probably sometime in my teens. I don't really do that anymore. I'm married. I think I'm just going to skip this question. Newest favorite character. Okay, there's a couple different directions I could go with this. Part of me actually wants to say Rathen from Elantris, which is, of course, Elantris is a book I read a really long time ago for the first time, and I just reread it recently, and I just felt like I really liked his point of view this time, and really he was just a much more interesting and complex character than I gave him credit for, and even though he was technically playing kind of a villain role for most of the book, I couldn't really entirely cheer against him. I didn't really want to see him fail as much as I remembered. I kind of appreciated what he was doing, so I'm going to say he's a new favorite character, even though not a new character that I read for the first time. I also really liked Maya from the Goblin Emperor. He's not exactly a flashy character, like his personality is pretty quiet, but he is someone who's just really good-hearted and is just trying to be a good leader and a good emperor and to do the right thing by all these family members that he is meeting for the first time. And it's just unusual to have a character that drives a story who is just so good in a core way and who struggles with things, but who isn't necessarily super talented or super amazing at anything, but is just really trying to do the right thing. And it's done in a way where it's not sort of cheesy or moralistic. It's very pure and simple and kind of inspiring, honestly, but it doesn't feel forced. It feels like that's just who he is as a character, and it's not something there's necessarily a spotlight on for the whole book either. It feels very natural. Question 10. Book that made you cry. I'm not sure if I can think of a book that made me cry this year. There probably was one. I can be a little bit of a crier sometimes, especially at sappy things in movies. It's happened more as I've gotten older. I don't really know what's going on. But I read The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. I actually read Circe this year as well, so I guess that's both of her books. But the story of Achilles is inherently tragic. He is a tragic hero, and there were a lot of sad things in that book. Of course, it's a book where you know he's going to die. I hope that's not a spoiler. So I don't know if I actually cried during that book, but it was very well written, and I definitely felt some sadness. So yeah, I guess I'll just mention that one for a book that made me cry. Question 11. Book that made you happy. Okay, I will mention Sourdough by Robin Sloan. I also read Mr. Penumbra's 24-Hour Bookstore by Robin Sloan, but I think I read that more at the end of 2019, and Sourdough I read in the new year. Both of his books really were feel-good books for me. They're kind of quirky and cute and sort of toe the line between being fantasy and not being fantasy. This was before the pandemic and before sourdough baking became such a meme, so I kind of think I need to go reread Sourdough sometime soon, but it's just a really sweet story. 12. Most beautiful book you've bought so far this year or received. That's actually tough. I haven't bought that many books this year, and most of them have been from the used bookstore and either just paperbacks with not great covers or kind of older, but let me see what I can think of. I'm gonna go look around. Okay, so here's what I got. My mom sent me a copy of Jerusalem, a cookbook, and this is a really pretty book. I mean, it's not fiction. It's not really even something you would read, but I mean, isn't that beautiful? And it also has this really nice sort of squishy, pillowy cover, so I feel like that's pretty good. Also, not a book, but for pretty much my entire life, I have kind of a notebook obsession. So this is just a blank notebook, and it's really shiny and pretty, and yeah, I think that's really nice. In terms of books I'm planning to buy, Empire of Gold is on pre-order. It should be coming soon, and the first two covers for the books in that series were really, really pretty, so I'm sure that that one will be as well, but I don't have it yet, so I can't show it. Okay, the last question is, what books do you need to read by the end of the year? Well, I have two sort of main reading projects going on right now. The first one is the Hugo Awards reading project, which I need to finish by the end of next month. The other one is a big Cosmere reread. So in terms of books I've self-assigned, I think that's it. I don't know if this question is supposed to be like books I'm looking forward to or books that I just have to read. I've also started talking about trying to read The Wheel of Time again. I'm not ambitious enough to say that I'm going to read all 14 books of The Wheel of Time before the end of the year, but maybe I need to start The Wheel of Time this year. I don't know, that's what I can think of. I've also never read The Dresden Files, and I feel like I've been hearing that mentioned a lot recently. Obviously, that's a series I've been aware of for a really long time and I've never felt super interested in, but maybe I need to try that. So that's all for the Midyear Book Freakout Tag. I don't know how much freaking out there was. Maybe I could have added a little more freaking out, but I think it was pretty chill. And in general, I think tags tend to be kind of chill. So I hope you enjoyed. Let me know down in the comments what books you have most enjoyed reading this year so far.